Well, update day on Call of Duty Season 1 Reloaded, and as you can see from the screen, it's not working. It's not working good at all. And I am full of things on the timeline that say, how could QA ship something this broken? Which I can't load the Warzone menu. um, And as someone who's worked in QA, and I have just based on reports and discussions and watching this game come out for the last 3 or 4 years, I have an idea of why something like this can happen, how it could happen, and kind of give an explanation. I don't work for them for Call of Duty in any capacity, so I can't tell you definitively. I've never been there, but having worked in QA, having worked in software, and shipped things that do this for our products, I have an idea. And so it has to do with how this software is developed, how the game is developed on the back end, and then how that development kind of gets shipped live to us, the consumers. So in a game like this, or in software like this, you have two different kinds of environment. I call them environments. You have the live environment. The live environment is what you and I, as consumers, as users of the product, interact with, right? So in the game, when we log into a game, we're in the live environment. And then you have a test environment. Now, there are different ways of creating a test environment, but generally you create a mirror of the live environment on a separate dedicated server. This is traditionally the way that was done. And that mirrored, so any change that you make to the live environment, you have to then redo on the test environment. So you kind of update them simultaneously. And then what happens is developers will clone the test environment for themselves, and then they will do their development within that test environment, and then submit that to QA, and QA will test that that kind of sub server, and they will test the changes. And then what will happen is typically it would pass QA in that small isolated environment, and then it would get shipped to the test environment as a whole and incorporated in the main test environment. And then QA would test it again within that test environment. And then when that test is perfect and shippable, then we take that and we would actually ship it live to the live environment, incorporate it into the live product that our consumers would use, and they would then get to see what we've changed, which in theory works very well. You test it in isolation, you test it in a broader capacity, and then you can ship it live and you just verify it works. The problem is what happens when you have two different people working on two different things at the same time. What often happens is different sections of a service, the game in this case, or the product that I worked on, different sections that seem completely separate from one another would actually share assets and share commands. And so changing something in one section of the site, for my example, did not always be as isolated as it would seem. So one example that I like to share is I had one test where it changed the look and feel of the login page. It didn't do anything. It just changed how the login page looked and felt. And then the other section, a different test, changed. What did it change? It changed something else. I don't remember. It was completely unrelated. And it changed like how images were fetched or something like that. But what happened is that somewhere deep inside, there was an old piece of code that fetched an image for the login site. And when that image fetching got changed, it broke some segment of the login site test. And when those two were put together under very specific circumstances, it would break the entire site. And so what happened is we shipped these two products that we tested to completion, and we actually tested them together in the main test environment. But the problem was there were so many permutations of ways you could log in that we didn't have the opportunity to actually explore all the different ways in which these two tests could collide with each other. We shipped it, and it actually bricked the entire homepage, and nobody could log in for like an hour and a half because some small nothing code that didn't appear in either test and didn't appear in the main test because of things like caching and how users actually interacted with the site in completely unexpected ways, actually could break everything. So, in a game like this, when you have probably 100 different projects being worked on, 100 different tests all being worked on simultaneously, what can happen is you have all of these different test environments that get brought together into a main test environment, but it's not the same environment that we see on the live environment. And so because this isn't a complete overhaul, like we're not reinstalling the entire game, we're just updating small sections of it, that changes that were made in the live environment that either didn't get documented, didn't get pulled down properly, or in some cases that are actual fundamental differences with the servers that are live versus the servers in the test environment, that those two that those kind of changes and those differences between the two environments can actually completely wreck the test and the update. And so something like this could be as simple as there's some server configuration or some server change that was made by a server management system that never was translated or brought into a test environment, so that the developers, when they develop an update like this and the testers test an update like this, they're actually testing it in one environment that is not going to actually relate to the live environment because of some of these other unrelated changes that have nothing to do with the code they're working on. And so when they ship it to the live environment and they put it live like this, all of a sudden we have all of these new problems that crop up that did not appear in testing. Or if they did appear in testing, they were so rare and so difficult to reproduce, they were not given a high priority. But because there's some variance between the live site, the live environment, and the test environment, it becomes a huge, huge problem for a lot of people like me, as you can see on the screen. And so I think it's in some ways it's unfair to always go after the QA people. Like, how could you ship something like this? Because they probably never ran into this. This was probably not something that happens to them because they don't have access to testing it on the live environment. So, and why? And so that leads to the question of why would the live environment not have a test section? So what one of the companies I worked for, what we did is we actually went from this system where it's like you're mirroring the test environment, and you have two, but they're completely different systems. And you have to take down the test environment, or take down the live environment, load the test environment in, make all the updates, then put it back live, and hope this doesn't happen. What they did is they actually switched to a partition of the live environment where we could actually ship our tests, and we did our final testing in a partition of the live environment. So we were on the live servers, we were on, we could interact with it just as a regular customer would. And that was actually hugely beneficial to improving stability of launches and preventing major crashes and things like this. The risk is, and there's a huge risk in that, especially in something like this, where you're loading the code and you're loading the assets and the things that are going to be used into a live environment that other people have access to. So the problem is, we already know that anything put on those servers that data miners can get to, it is so much easier to crack, leak, impede, and just get into these test environments. And another problem is that we ran into this, is you would get some bleed over. Sometimes the wall between the two would get a little thin, and we'd have problems in our test environments that somehow would leak into the live environment. So we'd have bugs that were, messing around within a test, or developers like just kind of, really pushing the limits of what they can do. And all of a sudden we get complaints rolling in from customers. Hey, I got this weird problem that just cropped up, and the developer responsible has to be like, let me just roll that back. And so in a game, in a AAA title like this, there's a massive risk that comes from testing on a live environment the same way that we would test at. Much higher risk than I think we had to deal with. So this sucks. I was really hoping to mess around with some guns and have some early content, and instead I can't get into the game, which is super disappointing to me. But I think that it warrants thinking about why this exists and how this problem comes to be, and adjusting our response in a way that's not being aggressive at QA, being aggressive at people that don't have the ability to solve this problem, because it's a fundamental issue with the way the development is probably being done, and it's probably being done for very good reasons that way. Because I mean, it's bad enough when content gets out early, but I mean, just think about all the hackers and the cheating aspects. If they could get their hands on code that's going to be changed in the future for future rollouts or test code, I mean, God, we could have some horrible things going on in this game. Even worse than way worse than anything we've already had if they have access to some of this stuff. And being on a live environment, not being in a contained closed server, within Activision, I think could really open those doors up. So I'd be willing to put like a bet an entire quarter on that's why that we don't test that way, that they don't put a partition up on the live environment and test live, and they keep it contained and then they ship it the way that they do. It just, when it doesn't go well, it sucks, and that's what we're facing with right now. So that's my perspective. That's what I think is going on. Wanted to just put that out there. If you have any questions, drop a question in the comments, and I'll catch you on the next time.